Sulaiman, we meet again. How's your week?
Saadadeen. My week was good, bro. Finally got a haircut, which is obviously why I felt confident enough to bring back the visuals for after
Love it,
work.
love it.
I've tried to incorporate some exercise into my weekly schedule, so I've been doing some skipping. What else? I've experimented with a few recipes for my smoothies that I have for breakfast, and I finally settled with the blueberry and banana smoothie.
Excellent choice.
Finally, and most importantly, I've been reading this book by the Harvard Business Review called On Managing Yourself. And yeah, there's been loads of gems that I've taken away from the book. But yeah, man, how has your week been?
Yeah, definitely in line with your theme of eating and healthy eating. I found that my fruit salads, which you're very aware of, has helped me like make sure I have a good start to my day. And I've tried to start my days also with going out on a jog. And that idea of starting your day off with something productive, which is a term we'll come back to later on in the episode, starting your day off with something productive definitely allows me to sort of snowball into more productive things throughout the day. And the book I've been reading recently is by one of my favourite authors, Mohsen Hamid, who also wrote The Reluctant Fundamentalist, one of my favourite books, a book that was later turned into a film starring Riz Ahmed and Kate Hudson. And this book, and one of the reasons why he's one of my favourite authors, is his ability to totally absorb you into one of his narratives. What he does in this book is he follows the lives of several different characters, and every time I find myself getting so absorbed into the lives of one of the characters he's created that I forget about the different characters existing. And every time I do it, I'm like, alright, cool. Next passage I read, the next character, I'm not going to get sucked in. I'm going to be totally aware.
Yeah,
he manages to do it each and every time. So it's something that I deeply appreciate as a fan of writing and literature. So that's been, broadly speaking, what my week's been like, man. So we've had our conversation with Wanipa, and now we're reflecting on it.
Now we're reflecting on it.
So
yeah,
I'll begin with my reflection, and then I'll ask you the
Please
question,
do.
and then you can take it from there. So one thing I took away from the conversation we had with Wanipa was to do something she said right towards the end of the conversation. It's an interaction you and her had, and it was this.
Something that I've struggled with at Cambridge is the relationship between self-care and self-development. So you kind of spoke about how we need to know our limits.
Yeah.
And for me, that's such a difficult concept to grasp because I don't want to have limits. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I want to be someone that can do everything, right? And it's knowing when to stop.
Yeah. Like you said at the start, I'm the plate spinner. I am
Yeah.
the chief plate spinner, and I'm telling you, a lot of them are, wobbling. A lot of them look like they were going to fall. There's been times where I've been at a very, very, very low point, and I think once you get on the brink of that stage, you have to just be like, I can't come and kill myself. Like, I literally just can't come and die, because this is even scripture, but what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses himself?
What that interaction made me think about is how often we feel guilty about taking time out for ourselves, and this obsession that we are told to have, or we often have, about being productive and being busy. And for me, it made me think about the importance of taking that time out for ourselves and what it means. So Wanipa rightly pointed to the fact that when you take those times out for yourself, it not only allows you to reflect upon what you've been doing, but it also means that when you do go back to working, you become even more productive and you avoid burning out. And it's something that we all are in danger of, and it's something you also alluded to in terms of that balance between self-care and ambition, not wanting to burn out, but also the reality that we're all human and we all need breaks at some point. And definitely, speaking about myself at this point, that guilt that you have about sometimes just laying in your bed and thinking, I've got so much to do, but you also are tired, so you also have to look after yourself. And one great quote and thought that I remember trying to apply in this situation is, sometimes you need to treat yourself like how you treat a good friend. And sometimes when we place ourselves,
I like that.
Sometimes when we look at ourselves in terms of how would I describe how I'm treating myself if I were a friend, allows us to really put into perspective how we're managing our time and how we're viewing the management of our time. Sometimes it's not always negative to take some time out for yourself. So that's what the conversation with Wanipa made me think about. So my question to you, Sulaiman, do you ever feel pressured to be super busy? And how does that make you feel?
That's a really interesting question, and the simple answer is yes, definitely. Like, I feel like me and you both, like everyone, we live in this very hyper kinetic, hyper fast environment in this kind of modern capitalist society where growth, productivity, and development are the sources of inspiration, are the things that we're all striving for. And I remember reading in the book where it says that never in human history has the human brain been asked to track so many different data points, emails, social media, text messages. So I feel like we've definitely been conditioned in this society to act fast and transmit data, plans, ideas as fast as we can. So I definitely think the social pressure plays a huge role. And it's something I'm working on. Like I mentioned it in the conversation with Wanipa, the trade-off between self-development and self-care. I think it's a line and it's a boundary that I'm continuing to try to discover and try to find for myself.
It's definitely
a really interesting
process.
thing to think about.
Yeah.
But yeah, bro, so my reflection from Wanipa's episode is on the power of community. So whilst being independent was a clear theme from our conversation with Wanipa, the importance and the power of community was also highlighted many times, such as when she spoke about her church visiting her dad whilst he was ill.
And then there was one point where my dad was really ill when I was about 12, that age. And then the way he was ill was like, it was like bad. And I didn't even fully understand it at the time. I just knew that this is not good. And just seeing the way the people at church acted towards him, going to visit him, and bearing in mind he didn't go to church, so they didn't actually know him, visiting him, bringing him his favorite newspaper, bringing him like yogurt, and just the way they would just pray with me and with him and for us and just looked after me as if I was their own child. I just really saw through them God's love.
And also when she spoke about the Cambridge ACS's role of helping black students settle into university.
Let me just sprinkle some goodness on our name. Like, we are Cambridge ACS. Like,
takes every whole life,
literally. And it's like the things we're doing are beyond just a society in university. It's not just about, throwing parties, having a good time. Like, we're really impacting young people's lives. Like, we're being role models. We're helping young black people see themselves in these institutions. Like, that's so important. And the way you carry yourself and the way you conduct yourself, just the way you make people feel is just so important.
I'm fortunate enough to say that I belong to many communities. I have my religious community, I have my local community, I have my university community, there's the community at Team Upside, etc. And I've witnessed firsthand the power of community coming together. Like me and you both being from West London, I'm sure you can definitely agree with me that following the Grenfell fire tragedy that happened a few years ago in 2017, me and you both, we saw the power of the Ladbroke Grove community in particular coming together, and also the other faith groups and also the other charities in London and the UK and the world coming together for the common good. So the power of community is something that I've seen many times, and it's something I think about often, and me and you have conversations about it often. And something I want to talk about, like whilst reflecting and pondering about the idea of community, is a theory and a case study that I came across whilst reading Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. So the study and the case study was about a town called Roseto in Pennsylvania, which had a very large Italian-American community. And in the town of Roseto in the 1950s, there was virtually no records of people dying from heart attacks. Like zero, like nearly zero. And despite heart attacks being one of the biggest killers in wider society, moreover, there was a very low crime rate, and life expectancy was significantly above average. So the researchers visited Risotto and obviously were very confused. They were asking, like, why has this community got such amazing health performance levels? And they eventually concluded, and they credited their achievements to the power of community in Risotto. So in Risotto, in the town, families were very close together. There was typically 3 generations living underneath one roof, and people never felt lonely. So it made sense that life expectancy and the quality of life was very high. But yeah, so after saying all of that about the power of community, the question that I had for you, bro, is like, tell me about a time. Tell me about a time when you've seen with your own eyes the power of community.
Not too long ago, a friend of mine got into a pretty serious car crash, and he ended up being badly injured and was in hospital for a long time. And your allusion to what happened after the Grenfell tragedy is very fitting, because it reminded me of what happened after my friend went to hospital. What ended up happening was everyone made sure that when my friend was in hospital, there wasn't a day that went by that there wasn't a group of people that went to visit him. And what was created essentially was an informal calendar. And so you'd go and visit him, and you'd see on the 2 tables just so many presents, cards, food, everything. And he ended up having to say, guys, like, stop bringing things because there's just too much stuff here. I can't do anything with it. And I remember also him sort of reflecting on that at the end of the year, and hearing his account on it and how much it moved him and his family, seeing how the whole community, sort of all his friends, his friendship group, came together and out of their own volition. So that for me was a key example of how community can mobilize, how friendship groups can mobilize, and it also reminded me of this saying and phrase that you know where you stand with your community or your people when times are hard. And Sophia mentioned it. He mentioned the idea of where you can judge a character of a man at his funeral, and I think that same sentiment applies to all of those examples, whether it's Grenfell, whether it's my friend going to hospital, or whether it's Sophia's grandfather's funeral. So definitely, I agree with you. Community is a very fundamental part of all of our lives.
Definitely, man. Definitely. Both of us have touched on some very powerful themes, and that just goes to show how fruitful our conversation with Wanipa was.
Definitely.
But before we end our reflection, let's introduce a close friend of ours. Her name's Rahab. She's a regular listener, and this is what she had to say about Wanipa's episode.
So this idea of independence and discomfort was something I found really interesting during the episode. Another thing I sort of wanted to pick up on as well, which I thought was missing from the discussion, interestingly, maybe because it was 2 male interviewers, was just this idea of how Wanipa feels her gender and her womanhood had played into her experiences. What were the turning points for her in the same respect that she might have had in her faith experience or her race experience? I know she said that she feels, this is something I related to quite a bit as well, that she feels that she had to mature from very early on and become a woman. It's interesting, why woman instead of adult? And do you feel like your gender experience has perhaps been downplayed a little bit in favour of your faith experience and your race experience? So yeah, I'd just be interested to know a bit more about that, really. And then also just one last thing was on this discussion of failure that you guys had. I know failure is something I've been querying myself quite a lot. And I know Sulaiman made the comment about, what does it even mean to fail? And Saadadeen said that it's all about focusing on the bigger picture and having perspective on what you're learning from the experience and how you can add to your toolkit. One thing I just sort of wanted to ask was, if you take failure to be an overly beneficial or positive experience each time, do you think that you might risk pacifying yourself or removing that sort of stinging or painful feeling that makes you work harder next time? How do you balance it so that you do grow from an experience of failure, not just tell yourself it's okay? Especially, I think I'd be interested in hearing from Wanipa, as a law student, as a student at Cambridge, where I feel like perceptions of success and failure are really quite black and white. How has that redefined her perception of success and failure, and how has she used that to continue to grow and keep going?
So folks, that's the end of our reflection session on one of his episodes. Thank you to Rahab for her reflections. Before we leave, we'd just like to say, we hope you're looking after yourselves. We hope you're washing your hands for the 20 seconds. We hope you're staying indoors. And see you next week.
That is it for this week. To keep in touch, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. That's afterwork_UK on Instagram and Twitter, and Afterwork Podcast everywhere else.
If you took even one thing away from this episode, give us a review on Apple Podcasts and comment on our YouTube video. Any thoughts or suggestions for future episodes, DM us on our socials or shoot us an email at afterwork258@gmail.com. In any case, see you same time, same place next week.